Shalom Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Pleasure to be with you again here on World Harvest Television Network. And we are in part 2 of the Arch of Baal, a hidden sign to the world, part 2. And I really got an incredible revelation since last week, something the Holy Spirit has been working with me on, trying to get me to go back and look at the abomination of desolation that Jesus speaks about in Matthew chapter 24. And when I went back and really took a serious look at this, I realized, well, no wonder why the Holy Spirit's dealing with me on this. It has everything to do with these arches, these mysterious arches that have been placed around the world. So I can't wait till we get to that part and speak to you about that on that. Just as a review, a little review from last week, we spoke about how that the Pope of Rome, Pope Francis, actually fulfilled the prophecy of Obadiah. Obadiah chapter 1, of course there's only one chapter there, where he drank upon God's holy mountain, him and the delegation that he had with him there. And of course it goes on to say, for as you have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually. Yea, they shall drink and swallow down, and shall be as though they had not been. In the Hebrew, just to the left of your screen, Ki ka'asher shutetem alcha kodeshi ishatu kol hagoim tamid. And we'll stop right there on that second sentence, because that's really the gist of what I saw in prophecy being fulfilled. And the reason why I was able to determine that the Vatican had fulfilled this prophecy, not just the Vatican, but even the churches that were participating in communions continually on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, is because of the way Hebrew is worded. It is gender sensitive. As we see in the first part here, ki ka'asher shutetem, or ka'asher shutetem, literally is masculine plural. And I just so happened, when I was listening to the Vatican's own broadcast of the communion service the Pope held in 2014 there on Good Friday, on Passover, he was actually stating that it was only the men from his delegation and the men that were there in Jerusalem, specifically using the word men. Let me know right quick, like then, there were no women, because even in the photographs that I saw in the video footage, you saw no women whatsoever present. So that caught my attention. But then it goes on to say, Ishatu kol hagoim tamid, which they will continually drink, the Gentiles. So this is not a Jewish thing. This is a Christian activity that has taken place on the mountain of God, on God's holy mountain, which is Mount Zion, according to the prophecy there in verse 17. And clearly, that's exactly what Rome did. Even throwing the Jews out of the tomb of David, which was very troubling to see that they did that. Had no problem with them doing a communion in the upper room. That's been done, no doubt before, but never done by the pontiff himself. So to me, it was prophecy being fulfilled. And the arches of Baal, the abomination of desolation, has a lot to do with this, friends. Now, when I say these things, as I said before, this is nothing against the Catholic people whatsoever, not even against the Catholic Church. This is specifically dealing with a bad egg in there that is trying to manufacture prophecy in the Middle East, trying to fake a millennial reign, if you will, trying to bring about the destruction of Damascus, trying to lead the world's militaries, the deep state of the United States, and as well as the NATO forces, into a battle in the Middle East to make prophecy fulfill the way that they think it should fulfill, as well as manipulating the Palestinian people and bringing about a two-state solution so that Jerusalem can be handed over according to the 1947 mandate that was supposed to be a UN resolution that was going to make Jerusalem an international city that would give the Vatican the right to control that. Also in the Oslo Accords of 1993-1994, we find out through different journalists such as Joe Bannerman, Barry Chamish, and others that have revealed that the Vatican was doing exactly that, trying to get control of the old city of Jerusalem. That is still going to come to pass. Palestinians will get East Jerusalem. The Jews will get West Jerusalem. That was already decided back in 93, 94. So it's no big thing when we hear President Trump say that the Jews, he believes that West Jerusalem is their capital. Well, that's exactly what Rome said too. So we're only piping what the piper's already said to pipe, I guess. Anyway, so we look at the Arch of Baal here. The New York Times, October 5th, 2015, the article here that came out, ISIS destroys the Arch of Baal inside of Palmyra. Not only the arch, but also some of the temples as well. Nothing unusual, though. I cannot help but wonder if there's not some collaboration going on there. Why, you might say? Because Rome, and we're not talking about the Vatican in this case here, but Rome historically, the Roman Empire, was always known for erecting arches everywhere they conquered. No different was the Arch of Baal when it was put inside of Palmyra, Syria, or Assyria back in those days there. So I think that this arch was destroyed intentionally and may have been done so in collaboration to be able to justify making a prototype. Because isn't it ironic how that the prototype keeps appearing in all the different cities around the world here recently, especially important cities where world events go on. Dubai, Italy, London, New York in the United States. Wherever that arch appears, Rome is conquering. I cannot help but wonder if we don't have a revived Roman Empire, such as we also had back during Rome under Titus's reign when he conquered Jerusalem with the help of the Assyrian military, and some try to put the blame on the Assyrians at the time for the destruction of the temple. Well, they did have their hand in it, and I think Obadiah also recognized that as well when Obadiah says about Esau, he blames it on Esau, but we know he's talking about Titus, the Roman general. He said, "You stood as if you were one of them." And of course, the Arch of Titus that was commissioned and built wasn't completed until after Titus's death, but it was built as a commemoration of Rome's victory over Jerusalem. Supposed to be their ally, by the way, and that's something that the Jewish people should keep in mind. Rome had made a covenant back during the time of the Maccabees in order had vowed to protect them. Well, instead, Rome came and took over. Doesn't seem like history is only repeating, or history is not really changed. It's only repeating itself, we might say, because what happened during the Maccabees when they were afraid too small of a nation to defend themselves against all the other big nations around them? They went, made a covenant with Rome. Rome comes in, later takes over, builds all of their places like in Beit Shean in Israel, and also down there on the coast, not far just north of Tel Aviv there, where Paul was grilled at there, and Capernaum, etc. All these different ancient Roman artifacts that were built there, showing that Rome and their covenant there took over Israel. Not much different than what we're seeing now with this 1993 Oslo Accords, supposedly, well, we won't go into all that. Joel Boehnerman, as we've brought that up many times, has shown what's going on there. So the arch was showing that they took the temple treasures back to Italy, back to Rome, and that's where those treasures were buried. And supposedly, according to my good friend there in Jerusalem there, has said to me that he believes, that's Gershon Solomon, that he believes that these artifacts are actually in the catacombs of the Vatican. Who knows? That's an interesting thought. Anyway, this article was sent to me not too long ago here on Breaking Israel News. It was written by Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. Very fascinating article. Is Arch of Palmyra New World Order's model for a temple of darkness? He quotes Daniel chapter 7 verse 23. The fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And then it goes on to say, a replica of the ancient Roman triumphal arch reappeared in Italy last week, accompanying yet another summit of world leaders while attracting over 2 million visitors since its presentation 3 weeks ago. One rabbi, an expert in New World Order, believes that the arch is the first step towards building a temple of darkness in Jerusalem. Very interesting indeed, and it did catch my attention, no doubt. And of course, as I begin to click around in Yehuda's articles there, it brought me to another one about the Arch of Baal. Edom and Ishmael alliance strengthens as world leaders gather under pagan Arch of Baal. That was in Dubai, India. But then he quotes a man that I actually know. Well, I should say an acquaintance, not know personally, and that's Rabbi Winston. Rabbi Winston, we've kind of exchanged letters back and forth before. He's tried to get me to come back to Judaism. But one thing that I did do was I was sharing with Rabbi Winston my concerns about the dangers of Esau, the biblical relationship to that with Rome. Pretty much as I have done in quite a few private communications, private chats on Facebook with Rabbi Tovia Singer, only to find out that both men are actually warning the Israeli people of some of the very things that I shared with them. Going a little bit further though, even finding some of the old sages that have also noticed the same insights that I'm sharing with them. Now I can't say that this is exactly where they got the information from or if they even listened to the videos that I sent to them, but it is kind of ironic that both men that I've had the conversations with, both these men, were actually sharing the same things. Rabbi Winston states here in about down there by the picture in the article, the bond has manifest in the strengthening of ties between the Vatican and the Palestinian Authority, as well as Pope Francis meeting with the president of Iran. Though Edom and the desire to rule the world is personified by Rome, Rabbi Winston explained that the archetype has biblical roots. The push for one world government goes back to the Tower of Babel, trying to put the power in the hands of the wealthy, the powerful, and the arrogant, he said. Thought that was interesting myself. But then come the press in my heart, the Holy Spirit pushing me. Go back and look at this prophecy that Jesus spoke about in the book of Matthew. Let me share with you some of the prophecy here in Matthew, but keeping in mind, and in a moment I'll read a little bit more of some of the prophecy there of Matthew. This is when the apostles were asking Jesus what was going to be the sign of his coming. They actually asked several questions. The signs of the end. What's going to happen? When will you come? How do we know? Right? All these, just paraphrasing the thought there. And so he goes into detail about what will happen. And if we have ever seen Matthew 24 coming to pass in modern days, today is the day we're seeing it. But this is what he said that caught that was troubling me by the Holy Spirit. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations. And then shall the end come. When you, therefore, shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let him which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. And of course, so on and so forth. A lot of people took everything to be chronological. And so they assumed automatically, because we are talking about the abomination that will make desolate, that what's going to actually happen is that after we have the wars and rumors of wars, as we have here in Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 through 8, that then there will come some statue or something to be put in a third temple. And this would be the abomination that maketh desolate. Let me read to you, though, these wars and rumors of wars. Matthew 24, 6 through 8, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, see that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And this is exactly what we're seeing. Look at it. I mean, when it comes to kingdom, the Saudi kingdom led by kings, the British Empire fighting the war in the Middle East. We have nations, Russia, China, all these nations are rising up. We have wars and rumors of war. Are we going to have a nuclear war or not a nuclear war? The whole world seems to be at war. What about North Korea, etc.? All these things. These are just the beginning of sorrows. The earthquakes in diverse places, we're seeing every bit of it, right? But that troubling thing about the abomination that maketh desolation standing in the holy place. Because again, remember, Jesus said, when you see that, those of you that are in Judea, flee to the mountains. Well, I began to work on the translation, and I went back to Daniel to see what Daniel actually said. And when I did, it shocked me to the core. I realized that when I was reading in Daniel's prophecy, what Daniel actually said matched with what was written in 1 John. And just paraphrasing for a moment, because I didn't think to put it in on this program here. 1 John, when he talks about the Antichrist, he says there are already many Antichrists that are in the world. And he said they went out from us because they were not of us. Remember, Antichrist doesn't mean against Jesus, or doesn't mean against the Messiah. It's Antichristos, or Antichristos. Literally is what the word is. And it means in place of, or instead of. It is a replica, a replacement, a fraud, if you will. And that's exactly what Daniel speaks about in chapter 9. I'm going to go there in just a moment. But then I decided to take it a step further. I actually have the book by George Howard, and that's Shem Tob's Hebrew Matthew. That's a 14th century document that the Jews had kind of held on to, that they had kept translated of the Gospel of Matthew in the Hebrew language. Now there is some scholarly debate that supports the idea that Matthew may have actually written his Gospel in the Hebraic language. But I won't go into that at this particular time, and neither do I really believe that Shem Tov actually has a copy of that original, but it is almost identical to ours, but there's a few little differences that really makes you want to take notice. Let's look, as you can see on this screen, the Hebrew version on the left, and on the right we have the English translation from George Howard, what he did. But in the red I put on there, Antichristos is what he says. It's transliterated in the Hebrew language there. But then he talks about where Daniel says about standing there, that the abomination, when you see it standing in the holy place, right? Now, let's look at the English version where I photographed the page, and I want to share a little bit with you. Let's back up to verse 14. And this gospel, that is evangeli, will be preached in all the earth for a witness concerning me to all nations, and then the end will come. I think that's actually speaking of the two witnesses. A lot of people never thought of it that way, but that's been my thought on it. Then he says something that's very interesting though. This is the Antichrist, and this is the abomination which desolates, which was spoken of by Daniel standing in the holy place. Let one who reads understand. Then those who are in Judea, let them flee to the mountains. And when I saw that Shem Tov, the Hebrew Matthew, actually considers the abomination itself to be the Antichrist, I knew I was correct. And when I was looking at Daniel's prophecy in chapter 11, verse 31, and also chapter 9, they both seem to indicate that indeed the abomination itself is not a statue, but rather it's the Antichrist himself, or the lineage of Antichrist. Let's take a look at it. Verse 31 in the King James Version, it says, "And arms shall stand in his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." Now, I want to take you to chapter 9, verses 25 to 27. Now, we know this is speaking about the 70 weeks of Daniel. I left out verse 24 to save time. But we start off with knowing that God has promised 70 weeks, or this is actually corresponds to numbers of years to the Jewish people. We don't have time to go into that, how that breaks down, but that's how it works out. Starting with verse 25. "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince," that's Messiah the Prince. Notice that. It's a Mashiach. It's Nagid Mashiach in Hebrew. "Shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." All right, now that may seem a bit confusing, but I'm going to break some things down for you, and it's going to make more sense. All right, when we're speaking about the Messiah as far as Yeshua, the anointed, the Mashiach, that's what we find in verse 25 when it says, unto the Messiah the Prince. In Hebrew, it's Nagid the Mashiach. All right, when we get to verse 26, it says, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. In other words, the Messiah would be killed. Don't forget that. I know we already know that Yeshua was crucified. Jesus was placed on the cross and killed. All right, he was also killed by the Romans. It was a Roman soldier that pierced his side. Don't forget that. We often like to blame it on the Jews. And the Jews did. We have to admit, as Jews, we had our part. We handed over Jesus to be crucified. He was tried before the high priest. All right? Now, it says here, the prince and the people of the prince that shall come. In Hebrew, there's no Mashiach there. It's only Nagid. So there's a prince that's going to come, and that prince that's going to become will be of the same people that destroyed the city and the sanctuary. He's of the same people. Now, the people that destroyed the city and the sanctuary, we know, were both the Romans and the Syrians, or Assyria, as we called it back in those days. It would be called Assyria, or Aram in Hebrew, which is modern-day Syria and northwest Iraq. Includes all that region right there. Oddly enough, prophecy being fulfilled like crazy. Nahum, Habakkuk, all prophesied of the destruction of the ancient city of Nineveh, etc. And even as we know, Isaiah about to be fulfilled, Isaiah 17. And as I've stated, that is something that Rome is trying to make happen by manufacturing their own prophecy. Now, here's what's interesting. So if we know that both the Assyrians and the Romans were guilty of that, how could this prince that shall come, how could he be of both peoples? Well, that's actually simple. Hadad was the sole surviving heir of Esau's descendants when David was also carrying out what Saul started and destroying all of Esau's children. He survived. He was raised up by the Pharaoh of Egypt of that time, just like Moses was. When he became of age, he marries the sister of the Pharaoh's wife. Then he asks leave to go back to his country. He doesn't go back to Mount Seir down near southern Jordan by the Aqaba. He goes to Syria, becomes the king of Syria, and then his descendants flourish in the ancient land of Assyria all the way down to the time of the destruction of the house of Israel. Well, later, the Jewish sages, they track his descendants moving from Assyria after they've already had children and become part of the Syrian people into northern Africa. And finally, Obadiah declares that Esau's descendants are living in Rome and they are part of the ones that destroyed the temple and the sanctuary. Now, the reason why we know that it's Roman as well is because Obadiah said, you stood aloof as if you were one of them. And according to several scholars, including that of Dr. Chuck Missler, who states that it wasn't Titus the Roman general that burnt the temple, but rather the Syrians. Obadiah also notices that and says, you stood aloof as if you were one of them, but God holds him to charge. So when they think of an Assyrian Antichrist, well, that's true too, because he's got Assyrian blood in him. All right? So, but nonetheless, so notice that he also, in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. A lot of times we're thinking, well, this is a future event. They're going to start the temple sacrifices. Well, they probably will, and they're going to manufacture that prophecy. But the problem is, that was the fact that the Romans themselves killed Jesus, the Messiah, in the midst of the last week, the 70th week. Something a lot of people never pay attention to. But abomination, and for the overspreading of abomination, he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation. So he's a destroyer. The Antichrist, as the Antichristos, as Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew brings out, that is the abomination, makes everything desolate. All right, now, We don't really need to go into this again because I already shared this with you, that the Mashiach Nagid, as you see in the red on the screen behind you, Ad Mashiach Nagid, this is the anointed prince. And then of course we get down here to where it's only the Nagid, Nagid Haba, the people of the prince that shall come. All right, so we've gone through that. And of course, as I said, what did they do? When Jesus says, when you see the abomination that maketh desolate standing in the holy place, in other words, what is he saying? When you see the false prince that takes my place stand in the holy place, you that are in Judea, flee to the mountains. He was actually talking about Titus the Roman general. But don't forget, John knew the revelation of this. There was more than one Antichrist, but there's also one that is coming. All right, so we're not done yet because there's two prophecies to this. Daniel chapter 11, verse 31. Watch what it reads here. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. That's what it seems to appear when we read this. If you look at that on the Hebraic side of the right of your screen, Uzarim mimenu ya'amadu, see, that's where it gets a little different. When we begin to really break down what he is saying here in the Hebrew language, I took and I did a literal translation because I began to realize that what we are seeing here, and the arm shall stand on his part, just seemed to be odd. The word arm, by the way, in Hebrew is actually spelled, the root of this, Zayin Resh Vav Ayin. The word seed in Hebrew is spelled Zayin Resh Ayin, Zara or Zara. They both sound exactly the same, Zoro, Zara, but the thing is Hebrew did not have the vowel points in there. They were added later. So you could use the word arm for strength, but you could also use lineage in this case here. But in the case of Memenu, Yamadu, that would be from which they stand. So when I really begin to break this down, to look at what's actually said here, I realize that Daniel chapter 11 verse 31 actually translates a little bit different. So I did a suggested translation, more of a literal translation, and this is what I came up with. The lineage from which they stand, or they arise from, they will wound, because actually the word right there, vet, chet, lamed, lamed, vav, there, is actually the word for wound. They will wound and take away the perpetual strength of the holy temple, which is Christ. And they will give in place of, because it's actually Natan, from the word Natan, a gift. They're giving their gift in place of the abomination that will cause desolations. So who is the they? It's their lineage. It's Esau's descendants. It's the Romans. They're giving that in place of, and this is what we end up with. An ungodly abomination that makes desolate. It is the Antichrist that down through the ages has always destroyed everything in his past. By the way, I'll be in America. Don't forget, we hope to see you there. Duluth, Georgia, the website that you can check this out on, I'll have at the end of the broadcast here on the screen for you. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live.